Thanks for taking a moment to view the video today on osteoporosis. What is osteoporosis? Bone softening, bone weakening. We've heard these terms bandied about, osteopenia, osteoporosis, and we often hear, well, years ago, we never even heard of this. Well, I think it was occurring to some degree, and maybe wasn't seen and understood and maybe even diagnosed quite as efficiently, but I think there are a lot of factors that are affecting the higher rate of osteoporosis, bone softening. What are some of the links? What are some of the factors that can affect why a woman, and then a man for that matter as well, loses bone? First of all, genetics. Some of us have a higher disposition, so there's a genetic leaning. Number two, how well did you form bone in your formative years, 8, 9, 10, 12 years of age? How well did you maintain it in your adult years, in your 20s and 30s and 40s? Were we doing good things to maintain the bone, or were we encouraging bone loss through lifestyle factors, inactivity, and some other areas that we'll cover certainly as well? Sex certainly enters in. Women are more predisposed simply because of lower bone mass and density to begin with. Men are certainly prone as well, unfortunately, but have a little more of what we call the anabolic hormones, such as testosterone, to maintain connective tissue and bone mass. So both are affected, women to a much higher, certainly to a much higher degree. Medications, secondary factors. Folks can be on certain medications, steroid medications, in some cases thyroid medications, medications used to treat immune and autoimmune types of conditions can encourage secondary bone loss. So there's a lot of factors from your genes, your age, your sex, how well you form bones during your formative years, how did you maintain them as you aged. Alcohol consumption would be another one. Tobacco smoking. If you drank heavily for years or even moderately for an extended period of time, you're at a higher rate for bone softening and bone loss. Tobacco smoking, absolutely associated with it as well. So then we have those lifestyle factors that enter in that go beyond what medications I may have been using and how well I formed the bones and maybe what are my genetic leanings. So when we talk about genes, I don't know that you have a gene per se that guarantees, God forbid, that you have osteoporosis, but we do know that those that are of lighter hair, smaller body frame, lighter complexion, blue-eyed, etc., there are certain characteristics that lend itself to lower bone densities during the forming years, and obviously then makes you more prone, certainly as you age. So we talked about what is osteoporosis, why does it happen is probably the big factor, and I would hope that I covered some of that with you. But some of you might be listening right now as you look at the Osteo Plus Essentials and our bone factor preps, and you might be looking at this and saying, well, gosh, I mean, most of those things you talked about don't apply to me, and yet I now have osteopenia, which is kind of a borderline bone loss issue. Osteoporosis, obviously porous, the implication that the bone has begun to lose a lot of its mineralization, certainly becoming a problem. So let's just talk about some of the points that I think are important to helping you to manage osteoporosis. Number one, diet. Diet becomes critical. Do we have an alkaline-forming diet rich in minerals, a lot of vegetables, fruit, lean proteins, not a lot of dairy? That doesn't necessarily build bone. I don't have time in this short teaching to go into all of that, but vegetables rich in minerals and antioxidants. Literature is showing that the more antioxidants you consume in your foods that have things such as lutein and zeaxanthines and cryptoxanthines and those yellows, orange, types and reds, vegetables, and even some of those fruits, more of those types of antioxidants, they're protective. They show that there's a diminished rate of bone loss in women of middle age and certainly elderly years. The other part is just antioxidant status. The greater your antioxidant status seems to be protective to our bones. Thirdly, stress. High levels of stress, high cortisol, and in the face of high cortisol over an extended period of time, our adrenals will then begin to drop our production of DHEA. High cortisol, low DHA And I often say stress melts your bones. So stress plays a role. Certainly the diet plays a role. And many of us eat a very acidic diet, which is a problem. An acidic diet would be a lot of meat, a lot of protein, wrong types of fats, lots of sugars. That is a very acid residue forming diet. So your diet has to be more alkaline, more vegetables, lean proteins, lots of good fats, nuts and seeds, that kind of that whole theme. So here's the key. A diet that is alkaline forming, plenty of minerals, is pro support to your bones. Number two, an anti-inflammatory diet, which would fall right in keeping with this. So if you have a diet that is very pro-inflammatory, a lot of sugars, a lot of deep fried fats, rancid fats, poor sources of fats, it will absolutely, a pro-inflammatory process producing inflammation in my body, diet, etc., anything that encourages that will cause my bones to be at a greater disposition or loss. So obviously all of my teaching is always about principle, prevention, proactivity. What can I do through lifestyle, what I consume, how I move? What are the other factors and cofactors that I could engage that can improve my bone health as opposed to just, quote, taking a supplement? So we have alkaline forming charts available on our website. I'm not real sure if we have first morning urinary pHs. If we don't, we're going to get that up there as well. Alkaline forming diets, first morning urinary pHs, and anti-inflammatory diet. You'll see a lot of those two diets kind of correlate. And the reason for the first morning urinary pH, because this gives you a tool to monitor how alkaline or how acid forming that you actually are. Back to the risk factors. And if you're doing them, we've got to reduce them. If you have bone loss, you eat horribly, you're inactive, you smoke, you drink sodas, a lot of stress, that's a prescription for disaster from a bone health standpoint. I'm not real sure else how to frame that for you, but it certainly is putting you in a very bad position from a bone health standpoint. Smoke, let's look at this. Your sodas, they got to go. That acidifies your body, draws minerals out of storage, out of bone. The acidification absolutely is involved in diminishment of bone health. So let's go into a little more of a proactive stance. Let's talk about the role of exercise. I'm a big believer that if we want to maintain our bone mass, you don't use it, you lose it. I've got to stimulate bone resorption. And in part how I do that is through physical activity and exercise. Bands, pushing, pulling will help the upper torso. Walking, biking will help more the hips and the lower components and the femur and so on. But you've got to be doing things above the head and pulling and pushing manners, either with resistance, with light weights, with bands that help to create a demand on the body. So exercise and physical activity is certainly critical. We talked about the dietary aspects. I believe you've got to have a 25-OHD level done, 25-OHD, vitamin D level. And I also believe that you should do a salivary testing for your hormones, DHEA, cortisol, absolutely testosterone, an estradiol, and a progesterone. We have them available. You can call our off-air toll-free number. Maybe I'll leave that at the end. Very, very important. So we've got to know what your hormones are. I'm not going to tell you that hormones are the only reason why we have osteoporosis and bone softening. I don't believe that to be true. But certainly diminishing or rapidly diminishing or prematurely diminishing hormone levels, or if you've been under years of stress and your DHEA levels have dropped, more than likely your testosterone levels may be dropping as well. Male or female, it doesn't matter. Women, you're just as prone to this aspect of losing bone if your DHEA levels have dropped and if your testosterone levels certainly have dropped to precipitous levels or really maybe in that lower quartile. You're at a much higher risk. Why? Because these hormones help to maintain anabolism. They're not catabolic hormones. Cortisol is catabolic, breaking down, and anabolic hormones are testosterone and DHEA. We've got to know what those levels are. Vitamin D level, your hormone levels, very, very critical. There's a lot of other things, certainly, B12 and homocysteine and a lot of the recent literature, but I really don't want to get into a lot of the detail of that. I want to try to keep this in a pretty simple format, an overview of your bone health issues. So let's just talk about the Osteo Plus Essentials, why it's important. We have two products available. We have a bone support, which is more of an entry level. You're in a proactive, a maintenance mode. That's an important prep. It's a very, very good, way beyond what you're typically going to purchase over the counter from a bone health support standpoint. And then we have the step up, which is the Osteo Plus Essentials, which gears itself more to folks that are in a depleted state already. They're in a significant point of depletion, penia or porosis, and they need some help. So let's talk about, I'm not going to go through every single nutrient, but let's just talk about the basic nutrients that we have in here. We have calcium on us, but we don't, obviously, but we don't have a ton. But they're fully ionized, body ready to absorb. And you hear me talk a lot about the types of minerals, so let's not get into all that. That's the citrate, the malate, salts, etc. 100% available and bioavailable. We counterbalance that with a lot of magnesium, similar salts, malate and glycinate salts and so on. Why? Because magnesium is documented that for every 100 milligrams, and some studies have shown that per day that you increase in magnesium, you can influence your bone mass in an upward manner by 1 to 2% per annum, just with magnesium. So dispel the myth, my doctor told me to take 1,500 milligrams a day of calcium and 800 IUs a day of D, and that's what I'm doing for my bone health. Wrong. We've got to get you on a synergism of nutrients, a whole complex of nutrients. So we know that it can increase bone mass, magnesium, along with the other minerals, calcium, but we also know that it's involved in alkaline phosphatase formation, which is very, very important to you maintaining some bone. Strontium. Strontium is an interesting product. We don't believe you should overdose with strontium, but we have strontium in here, and strontium is alone by itself not going to build bone mass, but when you take it in harmony with these other nutrients, definitely can build some bone. The literature proves it. And the mechanism is by stimulating osteophyte osteoblasts, baby osteoblasts. Osteoblasts in the bone are involved in bone manufacture. Osteoclasts break down, which we're supposed to have, and osteoblasts build up. Class break, blasts build. Strontium stimulates osteoblastic, baby osteophytic osteoblasts. Very, very important thing. Let's talk about vitamin K, K1 and K2. We know that it's important because it does a couple things. Gamma carboxylation of osteocalcin. Lots of fancy terminology. You just need to know that osteocalcin is critical for bone formation. K1 and K2, both proven in different studies to be involved in this gamma carboxylation process that's important to your bones. Osteocalcin synthesis, we can't forget about that as well. Zinc, let's talk about zinc. Zinc is involved in alkaline phosphatase formation, critical as mentioned. Similar, not similar, but along the lines of what magnesium does, also besides the alkalinization process to help you build some bone. Vitamin D, if you listen to me at all for the last 7 or 8 years, vitamin D is critical. You've got to have a vitamin D level, and it is important for the absorption of calcium and the deposition of calcium. How we use it and how we apply it in our bones, let alone how we absorb it from our diet, foods, and even from nutrients. Iodine, small amounts is certainly, and I want to go into detail on that, but certainly involved in the bone health process. So if you haven't picked up already, this is a synergism of bone nutrients. This is not just calcium. It's calcium, the right forms. It's magnesium, the right forms. It's strontium. I'll get to the boron. It's zinc. It's vitamin D. It is a complex interplay of nutrients that build bone. And then I've tried to give you some of the sidebars with your hormones and risk factors and so on as well. Copper, critical for cross-linking of bone. We definitely have some copper in here. A lot of people disagree with that, but there's copper. We have copper in our multi as well. Why? Because copper is critically involved in cross-linking. In other words, once these minerals are laid down in the bone, literally we have to form like a web-like structure. That's called cross-linking, collagen matrix. It is critical. Copper is critical for collagen, connective tissue formation, and cross-linking. Very, very critical to your bones. Manganese, critical for bone mineralization to help and facilitate other minerals to get into the bone, stay in the bone. No one talks about it. Manganese. We don't need much, but we need small, certainly, amounts. It's also important to know that boron is a hydroxylating type of a nutrient. It hydroxylates vitamin D. It's critical for you to utilize and maintain vitamin D. And the hydroxylation process is certainly involved in the bone building process. Actually, literature shows that adequate levels of boron can help us make our own hormones more efficiently. Estrogen, estradiol, is involved here, not in building a bone, it just helps you to reduce the loss. The ones that build the bone are going to be progesterone, DHEA, and certainly testosterone. So that is a quick overview, not only just of the bone building preps that we recommend, but kind of an overview on osteoporosis, and at the same time making sure that you know that there's not something magical about this supplementation and this routine, but it's a key foundation for you. But you've got to know what your risk factors are, you've got to know how to reduce them, and then what are the other portions or the players that I can put into place. If you have some specific questions, call the off-air number 877-275-7743. I hope this blesses you. I hope it encourages you with your process in building bone and maintaining your bone. God bless you, and see you on the next video presentation. Have a great day.